Thank you very much, Leanne, and thank you very much for the invite to this 10th anniversary of Unite Community and the 100th anniversary of the National Unemployed Workers Committees movement. The first time I ever came across Unite Community was when Steve Turner came along to address the National Consultative Meeting of Unemployed Workers Centres at Congress House. And at that time, the Unemployed Workers Centres were not at their highest point. We were hanging in there by our fingertips, probably punching above our weight, but we were rightly impressed with Steve's enthusiasm and vision for Unite Community. And we didn't need much convincing of the need for a trade union-backed response to organising the unemployed and organising in the community. So 10 years later, here I am still battling away in the Derbyshire Unemployed Workers Centres and active in Unite Community. Now in 1921, when the National Unemployed Workers Committees movement was formed, and in 1978, when the Newcastle Centre Against Unemployment was opened, that was the first unemployed workers centre, everyone, I'm sure, everyone concerned would have bit your hand off if they could have had the support of the biggest trade union in the country to help organise campaign within the community, fight for jobs, against unemployment, and campaign for a social security system giving dignity to all. Now in 1921, the National Unemployed Workers Committees movement was organised largely by shop stewards blacklisted after the First World War, Communist Party members, and it drew on a wealth of talent and organisational experience. And despite their ability over the years to mobilise thousands of unemployed workers, their separation from the organised trade union movement was admitted by its leadership as its biggest weakness. Now in the 1980s, the TUC helped set up over 250 unemployed workers centres throughout the country, usually local authority or manpower services commission, if any of you remember that, funded, and that came with all the constraints that local authority and Quango monies attracted. And speaking from experience, despite mass unemployment, it was always difficult to progress up the political agenda, the issues facing people out of work or on benefits. And that I'm saying even within the trade union movement itself, it was difficult to raise those issues. We were always, and generally in the trade union movement, we're always firefighting. We're battling this week's or even today's problems, and largely failing to see the bigger picture. And this is not usually out of design, but the trade union movement is so complex and it's difficult for it to become the dynamic body that many of us would wish it to be. But the fact still remains, unemployment underpins nearly all the issues that trade unions fight on the industrial level. Wages, terms and conditions, safer workplaces, tackling racism in the workplace and in the wider community. All of those issues are much more difficult to fight with a backdrop of mass unemployment. The shrinking of the trade union movement over the last 45 years is in no small part down to our relative failure to organise amongst the unemployed and better engage in the wider community. Everyone knows that if there's 20 people at the gate waiting for your job, how can you argue for better terms and conditions? The issue of fire and rehire can only happen when bullying tactics can be used against a frightened workforce. The fear of unemployment and our inadequate social security system gives the employer the whip hand. And we all know this. Barry Johnson, who I mentioned when we were before the meeting started, his mother was involved in the National Unemployed Workers movement, and he was key to the Derbyshire Unemployed Workers Centre's growth over the last few years. He died a year last January. But he always said to me, and he said to me when I first started at the Unemployed Workers Centres, that there's only ever been 3 periods of full employment in the UK. The First World War, the Second World War, and the preparation for the Third World War. Outside of that, you've always had mass unemployment. So it's not going to go away unless we sweep away capitalism. So we have to organise. And I'd like to just do a quick comparison between the issues that faced us faced people in 1921, the issues that faced us in the 1980s, and the issues that face us now. I was lucky enough to have met a lot of people in Chesterfield who were involved in the unemployed workers movement in the 20s and 30s when I first started at the Chesterfield Unemployed Workers Centre in 1985. And they told me that in those days you could just take a soapbox, stand outside the labour exchange and address tens, 50s, hundreds of people standing outside the labour exchange. Contacting people who are out of work was done by chalking on pavements outside the labour exchange, holding meetings, and they could mobilise a lot more people than we could 60 years later, when they'd realised that if you fetch people in on 5-minute interviews, that all you could ever do was talk to individuals walking into the job centre, and those individuals hardly ever saw any groups of people who were facing the same sort of problems that they were facing. If you fast forward now to 2021, although they're starting to, and PCS will tell you that they're starting to bring people back into job centres, despite all the problems. The majority of people over the last year and a bit have been signing on by mobile phone. They've never been near a job centre. They've never been near anybody who's facing the same problems as them. And that brings a whole host of problems to anyone wishing to organise those out of work. Those out of work now have tended to be young and predominantly women, those who've been made redundant during this period. And our methods of trying to organise, of trying to reach out to those people, has largely, for the unemployed workers centres, been a difficult issue, because we, like a lot of people in the trade union movement, are growing older and aren't as good at making the contact that perhaps we should be. So there's a real big organisational challenge to getting the word out there to those people who we wish to organise. But we've got to do it. And Unite Community is the only show in town, and we've got to make it grow. Now, the fight for the £20 uplift is the biggest and most important challenge that I've faced, I think, in the unemployed workers centres. We ran campaigns throughout the 80s, 90s, and into the new millennium, fighting for increases in benefits. Some years it went up 55 pence, some years a quid. But when they put it up by £20 at the start of pandemic, largely out of embarrassment at the inadequate social security system, we'd have never ever been able to campaign to get benefits up by 20 quid. It's the most important advance. I know it doesn't mean that people are well off, but the fact of the matter is, if we lose this at the end of September, it will be an absolutely drastic issue for people coming off of furlough and for people faced already with the problems of having to claim universal credit. So together with others, we've got 3 months to save it from the chop and get it extended to those deprived of it so far. And winning that campaign is important to organising the unemployed, because it's far easier to organise, to grow in membership if you're winning than if you're on the back foot. And it will show the value to people of coming together. And this is what trade unionism is all about, of people coming together, because together we can win things, divided we beg. And so what a 10th birthday present it would be for Unite Community if we were to win this campaign. So get involved if you're not already involved in this campaign. Let's come back in 5 years' time with a bigger Unite community section, a stronger union, with these victories under our belt, and have the solidarity between all workers, both in and out of work, for all our benefits. Thank you.